Let's copy this comment right here. And we're gonna paste it here. So this is gonna be our main content. So inside this, we want a div with a class of container fluid. So we want the maximum container. And inside that, we want to define our row. And then we're gonna say justify content evenly. So inside this row, we're gonna define our 3 columns. So our 3 columns will be the sidebar, timeline, and our chat bar. So let's copy this comment. Let's say sidebar right here. And we're gonna define our column. So call, let's copy this, paste it 2 more times. This will be our timeline. And this will be our chat bar. Now we do want to define the column size for these. So on mobile screen, they all will be 12 columns. So it will take the full width of the row. And then for large screen, so let's say call -LG. We want the sidebar to take up 3 columns. Let's copy that. And also our chat bar will take up 3 columns. So the maximum columns in a Bootstrap row is 12. So this will leave us the remaining of 6 columns. And we're gonna give that to our timeline right here. So sidebar and chat bar will be 6, 3 and 3. And then our timeline is another 6. So that's the total of 12 columns in a row. All right, let's give this a quick save. And now we want to focus on our sidebar first. All right, let's quickly take a look at our sidebar. So into our live link, we have this top section right here, and then these shortcuts, and then finally a footer. All right, let's work that out. So back into VS Code. So let's have a div with a class of d-none. So on mobile, we're not going to show the sidebar. And then for our large screen, we want to say display block. We also want to give it a height of 100%. And we want to fix it to the top. After this, we're going to say overflow hidden. Next, we want some inline style. We're going to define a max width. And it's going to be 360 pixel. We're going to set the width to be 100%. And then finally, a z index of 4. Inside this, we want a unordered list. And then below this, we're going to have our terms and condition. So let's work on the unordered list. So inside this, we're going to have our top section and then the shortcut section. Let's focus on the top section. And we want to style our UL. So let's say class. Let's say navbar -nav, empty -4, ms -3. We want to display flex. And we want it to be a flex column instead of row. Padding bottom 5 and also margin bottom of 5. Next, we want some inline style. Let's say padding top will be 56 pixel because our app bar is 56 pixel and we need to push down the content so our app bar won't cover it. All right, let's work on the top section. The first thing we have is our avatar and then the items. So let's work on the avatar. So let's have an li tag with a class of dropdown -item. We also want to say p-1 and then round it. Inside our li, we're going to have an a tag, hashtag for the ref. We also want to say class. We want to say text decoration none. Also text dark. Next deflex and then align item center. Inside this, we want the image of the avatar itself. So let's have a div with a class of p-2 and then we want our image tag. Once again, unsplash. We're going to use the collection of happy people because this is the main user avatar. The class will be rounded circle and then me-2, some inline style. Width will be 38 pixel. Also the height and then object fit cover. And then under this div, we're gonna have another div with a paragraph tag with a class of m-0, and we're gonna say John. Give this a quick save. Let's check out our desktop. And here's our first item. All right, let's continue. Back into VS Code. So our item is gonna be exactly like our avatar, and the only thing we're gonna change is the image. So let's copy this li tags, and we're gonna paste it here. We're gonna change the text to say friends, and then borrow a Facebook icon. So I have it right here. I'm gonna paste it here. Let's give this a quick save. Check out our desktop. And here is our first item. All right, back into VS Code. So once again, the only difference between these items are the image icon and the text. So I'm just gonna duplicate this about 4 more times, and then you can change its content later. Actually, I want 5. So I'm gonna copy this one and change this to a 5. Give it a quick save. Let's check out the desktop. And here's our 5 items. The next thing we want is this see more button right here. And this actually is an accordion. So let's navigate to Bootstrap and search for accordion. All right, so right here, let's copy all these codes. Back into VS Code. Let's collapse this. And then we're gonna say see more. We want an li with a class of p-1. The type will be a button. And then inside this li, we want to paste in our accordion. All right, let's scroll up. So this will be the first item, the second item, and the third item. We're actually just gonna use 1. So let's remove all of this. Give this a quick save. Now check out our desktop. Here is the accordion. So we're gonna change this into the see more button. And then when the user click it, it's gonna show more items down here. All right, let's work that out. Back into VS Code. We're actually gonna remove this class right here. We're also gonna remove this accordion item class. So this right here will be our see more button. And this right here will be our content. So now let's collapse this and work on our see more button. The first thing we want to do is actually remove this h2 and turn that into a div. So right here, we're also going to remove the ID and the class. And then this button, we're going to change it into a div. We're going to remove this accordion button class. And we're going to say deflex, align item center. And then here we're gonna say expand to be false. Now let's work on the buttons. So let's remove this right here. And we want a div with a class of p-2. Inside that we will have our icon. So let's say fas, and then fa-chevron, -down. We're gonna say rounded -circle, and then p-2. We also want some inline style. Let's say background color will be d5, d5, d5. And we're gonna say important. All right, below this div, we're gonna have another div. Inside, we're gonna have a paragraph tag with a class of m-0. And we're gonna say see more. Give this a quick save. Let's check out our desktop. And here's our button. Now let's work on the content body. So back into VS Code. Here's our see more. Now we want to work on the content. We're actually going to remove everything inside this div. We're also going to remove the body class. And we're going to remove this class of show. Because by default, we do not want to show the accordion expanded. All right, so let's work on the content. And we're going to have the first item. So let's have a div with a class of deflex, align item center, and it's going to be a drop down -item. We're going to remove all spacing, so p-0 and also m-0. Inside this div, we're going to use a Facebook icon. So let's have our image tag, I have the link right here in my clipboard. I'm going to paste it here. And for the alt, I will say from FB. Let's have a class of rounded circle. And some inline style. Let's define the width to be 38 pixel. Also the height. And then object fit cover. We're actually going to need to wrap this image tag. So let's cut this into our clipboard. And we want a div with a padding of 2 all around. So p-2. Now let's paste in our clipboard. And then under this div, we're going to create another div with a paragraph tag and a class of m-0. That's a campus. All right, give this a quick save. Let's check out our desktop. And here's our first item. All right, back into VS Code. So once again, I will just copy them and you can change the content later. Let's check out our desktop. And here they are. The next thing we want to work on is our shortcuts. So it's pretty similar. The only differences will be these square images. And also we have a pop-up right here where we click edit. All right, let's work that out. But before we do so, there are some minor differences between these items right here. So as you can see, there's a tag that's say one new. And then also right here. We also want to include that in the code. So back into VS Code. Let's scroll up. I'll collapse these C more. So let's target our second item, which is here. I'm going to expand it out. And below where it says friends, we want an icon. So IFAS, FA-circle. And then we're going to say text primary. Next, we want some inline style. Let's set the font size to be 0.5 rem. And then underneath this, we're going to have a span tag and a class of fs-7. Also text primary. And we're going to say one new. Give this a quick save. And here's our little tag. Let's also do that for the last item. So back into VS Code. I'm actually going to copy these lines right here. Collapse 2. And then scroll down. Let's paste it down here. And then let's say 9+ new videos. Give it a quick save. Back into our desktop. And here's our tag. All right, let's work on our shortcuts section. I will collapse everything here. So the first thing we want to define is our horizontal break. We're going to give a class of M0 to remove all default spacing. Next, we want to work on a heading that will say shortcut and then the edit buttons. So let's have a div with a class of dflex, align item center, and then justify content between. Next, let's say mt-2 and then text muted. And now we want an edge 4. It's gonna say your shortcuts. Inside this, we want to set up a class of m-0 and also text muted. Beneath this, we want to set up our paragraph tag with a class of m-0. Text will be primary, me-3. Let's give this a quick save. Now let's check out our desktop. We forgot to spell out edit. So in our paragraph tag, we got to say edit. All right, now let's check out our desktop. So when the user click this button, there should be a module. So let's navigate to Bootstrap and search for a module. Once again, we're gonna get this one. So copy the code back into VS Code. Let's place our module right here. All right, once again, let's get rid of this button, but we want its function. So let's copy these attributes inside our clipboard. And we're gonna paste it here inside our paragraph tag. Now let's remove this button. Let's change the name. Let's say shortcut module. So inside our module, here's the head. Here's our body. and then our footer. Next, we want to remove the backdrop. So let's say data-bs. We're gonna say backdrop and set that to false. And now down here, let's say module dialog. We're gonna say centered because we want to center this module on the page. All right, let's work on our head. Let's say align item center here. And then in the h5, let's say edit your shortcuts. We're going to remove the default class. And let's say text dark, text hyphen center, width will be 100%, m-0. Let's give this a quick save. Check out our desktop. Here's our module. All right, let's continue styling it. So we have our head. Now let's work on our body. So let's actually look at the live link one more time. And here is our head. This will be our body. We're gonna have a paragraph and then a search and then deselection right here. And then finally our footer. All right, so back into VS Code. Now in our body, let's set up the paragraph tag. So let's have a paragraph tag with a class of text muted. And inside, let's say lorem 20. So we're gonna have 20 characters. After this will be the search. And it's gonna be the same search right here. So let's locate that all the way up into our app bar. Let's target our chat dropdown. Here's the search. Let's copy the li. Now let's collapse the app bar. Let's scroll down. So here's the search. Let's remove this comment. Give it a quick save. And here's our search. All right, let's continue. Let's fix this spacing right here. Let's collapse this. So we're gonna have three options. So let's say short one. First, let's have an li tag with a class of my-1 and also p-1. Inside this, let's have a div with a class of deflex. We're gonna say align item center. And then justify content between. Inside this, we're gonna have the image and the text. And then we're gonna have our selection dropdown. So let's work on the image. Let's have a div with a class of deflex, align item centers, and also justify content evenly. Inside this, we want our image. Let's have a div with p-2. Now we're gonna have our image tag. Let's use unsplash again. And we're gonna use the random one. Let's say short image. Actually, shortcut image. We're gonna have a class of rounded. And we're gonna set a border and our border size of 1. Also, our border color will be secondary. It's gonna be a light gray. After this, we want some inline style. We want to set the width to be 38 pixel. Also the height 38 and then object fit cover. All right, under this, we want our text. So let's have a div and a paragraph tag with a class of m-0. And we're just gonna say lorem ipsum. Give this a quick save. Let's check out on our desktop. Here's our image and text. Next, let's work on the selection dropdown. So back into VS Code. Let's scroll down. Here will be our selections. So let's have a select tag with a class of form-select. We're gonna set the width to be 50%. Remove the border and give it a background of gray. Let's remove the name and ID. Inside our select, let's have our options. So let's say 1 and duplicate this 2 times. All right, give this a quick save. Now let's check out our desktop. And here it is. Cool, let's duplicate this a few times. So back into VS Code. Here's our short. So let's duplicate it about 2 more times. Give it a quick save. And here it is. All right, and that's pretty much it. Let's go back to VS Code. Let's work on our shortcut items. So we're done with the module. Let's remove this spacing. So let's say end right here. This will end our module. And now under this div, we want our shortcut items. So let's say short 1. Once again, it's gonna be the same as this. So let's copy this code right here, back into VS Code, and that's all the way on top. So let's copy this li right here. Let's scroll down, and we're gonna paste it here. Let's remove this comment, and let's edit the image. So we're gonna use unsplash right here. We're gonna say random, and it's gonna be random 1. It's not gonna be a circle. We're just gonna say rounded, set a border, and then border 1, also border secondary. Here we'll say lorem ipsum. All right, give this a quick save. Here's our first item. Let's duplicate this a few times. So let's remove this space right here. Copy all of this. Back to our desktop. And here's our 3 items. We're also gonna need the see more button right here. So let's copy that. Let's scroll up. And right here. Let's paste it here. All right, we wanna tweak this accordion. So let's scroll up. So let's target this right here. Press Command D. And we wanna say short accordion. Give this a quick save. Now let's check it out on our desktop. Here it is. And all we have to do is just change these images right here. So back into VS Code. So right here, item 1, let's remove this and use unsplash. We're gonna use random 1. So let's copy this. Also, let's tweak this to say rounded, border 1, border secondary. So it's gonna be the same thing for our item 2. So let's copy these 3 attributes and let's paste them here. This will be random 2. And then this right here will be random 3. All right, give this a quick save. Onto our desktop. And here it is. There should be a 2 right here. All right, let's take care of our items. So let's collapse everything. And then finally, we want to work on our terms. So let's have a div with a class of p-2 and also mt-5. Inside this, we want our paragraph tag. Let's say text muted and also fs-7. Inside this, we will have privacy, terms, advertising, add choices, cookies, and then let's say flexbook copyright. So ampersand copy semicolon 2021. And we want to separate these with the bullet symbol. So let's say ampersand hashtag 8226. Let's copy this, paste it here, and then here. Give this a quick save. Let's check out our desktop. All right, and here's our terms. So there are 2 more things that we need to do. The first is by default, this edit does not show. Only when we hover over it, it will show. So like this, in our live link, it does not show, only when we hover over it. And also if you notice, there is no scroll bar, but then when we hover over it, it will show the scroll bar. So let's add that feature in. All right, back in VS Code. The first thing we want to do is locate our shortcuts. So right here in our heading, we want to add our custom class. So let's say edit hyphen heading, and then here, let's say edit hyphen button. Give it a quick save, and let's navigate to our main CSS file. So let's scroll down. Let's say edit right here. The first thing we want to do is target the edit button. And by default, we want to give it opacity of 0. And then we want to set the hover state to be opacity 1. Also, when our user hover over the heading, so edit hyphen heading, and then hover, we want to target our button and set the opacity to be 1. Give us a quick save. Back to our desktop. So by default, we do not see it, only when we hover over it. Like that. Alright, we also want to turn this into a pointer. So let's navigate back to VS Code. And in our paragraph tag right here, let's say type will be button. Also, let's scroll all the way down to our terms. So right here, each of these needs to have the semicolon. Give this a quick save. All right, now let's work on the scroll bar hover. So let's scroll all the way to the top of our sidebar. So right here, let's collapse our UL. Give a custom class called scroll bar. Give this a quick save. Let's navigate to our main CSS. And then here, let's say scroll bar. And we want to target the hover state. And let's set the overflow to be auto. And say important. Give it a quick save. Now let's check out our desktop. So when we expand this, we will see the scroll bar. Alright, and this will wrap up our sidebar. Let's work on our chat bar. So back into VS Code, back into feed. Let's collapse sidebar and then focus our attention to the chat bar. Once again, we want a div with a class of d-none. So we're gonna hide the chat bar in mobile view, and then d-xxl, we're gonna display that to block. Next, let's set the height to be 100%. We want this to be fixed top, and then we want to say right 0, so n-0. Also, the overflow will be hidden. And then we want to use our custom class of scroll bar. Alright, now let's have some inline style. The first style will be the max width. We're going to set that to be 360 pixel. Our width will be 100%. Z-index will be 4. Padding top will be 56 pixel. And then finally, we want to say left. Set that back to initial. And we want to say important. Alright, now let's take a look at our chat bar. So we're going to have two main sections. The first will be sponsored. And then we have our contacts. Inside sponsor, we have this drop-down menu. And then in contacts, we have these icons. The first will be the chat settings. The next one will be new message. And then here is going to be a module to create a chat room. Next, when we hover over our friends, there are these popovers. And when we click one of our friend, the chat will appear. Alright, let's make it happen. So back into VS Code. Inside this div, we're going to create another div. And we want a class of p-3 and also mt-4. We're going to have our sponsor sections, followed by contacts. Let's work on these sponsors. So first, let's have an h5 that says sponsored. And we're going to define a class of text muted. After this, we will have our first sponsor. And then inside, let's have an li tag with a class of dropdown-item. Next, let's say my-2, and then deflex. And then finally, justify content between. Inside this, we'll have our image and then our icon. So let's work on the image. First, let's have an A tag, hashtag for href, class, let's say text decoration none, and then also text dark. We're gonna say deflex, and then align item center. Inside our A tag, let's have our image tag. Once again, let's use unsplash, and then we're gonna use the random /1 for the alt. Let's say sponsor image. Let's have a class of rounded, and then me-3. Let's define some inline style. Let's set the width to be 100 pixel and also the height 100. And then finally, object fit cover. Under our image, we want some text. So let's have a div inside a paragraph tag with a class of m-0. We're gonna say lorem ipsum. And underneath this, let's have a span tag with class text muted. And then fs-7. And we're gonna say loremipsum.com. All right, now let's work on our icon. So let's scroll up. First, let's have a div with deflex, align item center. Also justify content center. Let's say p-1, bg will be white, mx-2, and then it's gonna be a nav-item. All right, the type will be a button, and we're gonna define some inline style. Let's give it a width of 38 pixel. Also the height, 38 pixel. Inside that, we want our icon. So let's say I, class of FAS, FA-ellipsis, -edge. Next, let's say text muted, and then p-2. All right, let's give this a quick save. Let's check out our desktop. Here's our sponsor, and we gotta make this into a circle. Also remember, there's gonna be a drop down right here. So back into VS Code, let's scroll down. So in the icon, let's say rounded -circle, and then into our icon, this will be a drop down. So data -bs-toggle, and it's gonna be a drop down. Next, let's create our drop down menu. So let's have an li with a class of drop down -menu. Inside that, we want 3 items. So let's say item 1. Let's have an li tag with a class of drop down -item. Inside that, we want our anchor tag, and then the class of deflex, align item center. Also text decoration none, and then text dark. Inside our anchor tag, we want our first icon. So I, FAR, FA-window, and then -close. Underneath this, we want our text. So let's have a div with a class of ms. So let's have a div with a class of ms-3. Inside that, we want our paragraph tag. So p and then a class of m-0. Let's say hide add. Underneath this, let's have our span tag and say text muted, fs-7. And we're gonna say never see this ad again. All right, give this a quick save. Check out our desktop. Let's click on our icon, and here's our dropdown. So back into VS Code, there's gonna be a total of 3 items. So I'm just gonna duplicate this, and then you can change the content later. Give it a quick save. I'll collapse these. Let's check out our desktop. And here it is. Also, let's fix this issue. So when we click this, if you notice, there's a blue background. All right, let's take care of that. So back into VS Code, let's navigate to our main CSS. So what we want to target is the drop-down item active. So drop-down -item :active. And we want to set the background color. So let's use a gray of D5. And we also want to say important. Give this a quick save. Check out our desktop. And that should disappear. All right, cool. Let's create our second sponsor. So back into VS Code. I'm just gonna duplicate the first sponsor. So in our feed, here's our first sponsor. I'll duplicate it. Give it a quick save. Back to our desktop, and here's our second sponsor. All right, let's work on the contacts. So back into VS Code. So the first thing we want to do is set a horizontal break, so HR, and give it a class of m-0 to remove the default spacing. After this, let's create a div with a class of deflex, align item center, and then justify content between, and then also my-3. Inside this, let's work on our heading. So we're gonna have a paragraph tag with text muted, fs-5, and then m-0. We're gonna say contacts, and then underneath this will be our icons. Let's have a div with text muted. This will be our first icon, so I1, and it will be our video icon. So let's say FAS, FA-video, and then MX-2. The type will be a button. All right, give this a quick save. Let's check out our desktop. And here's our first button. So when we click on this button, there should be a video module right here. And let's do that. So let's go to Bootstrap, copy this module back into VS Code. So let's say I1 module. So let's paste that in. Once again, let's remove this button, but take the attributes, copy that into our clipboard, and we want to paste it here into our icon. Let's rename this. So Command D, and let's say video module. Let's remove this button. Also here. So here's our head. Here's our body. We are not gonna need a footer, so let's remove it. First, let's set the backdrop to false. So data BS backdrop false. Now let's go down to this div. We want to say module dialog centered, and then we want a large module. So let's say module-LG. And then inside module content, we want to say BG-dark to have a black background. Now let's work on our header. So we're going to remove this edge 5. Also remove the border. Next, we want a white close button. So right here, we're going to say btn-close-white. All right, let's collapse this and work on the body. So down here, let's remove these dots. Let's have some classes. So let's say deflex. Flex direction will be column. We want to say align item center. Also justify content center. Let's have some inline style. So the min height will be 400 pixel. All right, let's work on the body. All right, so inside this div, first let's have an icon. So FAS, FA-video, and then FS-0. Underneath this, let's have an H3, and we want to say schedule a room for later. And then we want to set the text color to be white. So let's say text white. And now let's have a paragraph tag and also say text white, text center. Width will be 50%, and then MX-auto. Inside, let's say lorem 25 characters. And then underneath this, we're gonna have a button. So let's say btn with a class of btn, and then btn-lg, also btn-primary. And then finally, rounded-pill. We're gonna say schedule room. All right, give this a quick save. Navigate to our desktop. And let's try it. And here's our module. All right, cool. Let's work on the rest of the icons. So back into VS Code. First, let's collapse this first icon and also the module. And here's gonna be our second icon. So I2, and this will be for our new chat. So let's have our icon and then FAS, FA-search, and then MX-2. The type will be a button. And then this will trigger our new chat module window. So let's say data-bs-toggle. We want to say module, and then we want to target our new chat module. So data-bs-target, and we gave it an ID of new chat. All right, give this a quick save. Now let's check it out. So this should trigger our new chat module, and here it is. All right, cool. Now let's work on our last icon. So back into VS Code, let's collapse this, and we're gonna say I3, and this will be our chat setting. So let's say FAS, FA-ellipsis, -edge. We're gonna say text muted, and then MX-2. Type will be button, and then this will be a drop down to trigger our chat setting. So it's gonna be the exact same thing as this right here. So let's navigate to this section and copy the code. So let's scroll up to our app bar. And let's locate the chat. And it's gonna be right here. So let's collapse this setting dropdown. And then we're gonna copy this whole element. Let's collapse our app bar. And then let's scroll down right here. We want to paste in our UL. Let's scroll up and then collapse this. Inside our icon, we want to say data-bs-toggle, and we want to say dropdown. Give this a quick save. Now let's check our desktop. And here's our chat settings. All right, the next thing we want to work on is our friend list. And also when we hover over them, there is this pop over right here. All right, let's work on it. So back into VS Code, let's collapse this. Also this. Let's scroll up. Let's collapse this whole div. And underneath it, we're gonna have our first friend. So let's have an li tag with a class of dropdown-item. We're gonna say rounded, my-2, and then px-0. The type will be a button. And inside our li, we're gonna have our avatar. So let's have a div with a class of dflex. Also align item center. mx-2. Inside this, let's have a div with a class of position relative. Because we're gonna have a badge. So right here, this green badge right there. Now inside this div, we're gonna have our image tag. So once again, we're gonna use unsplash. It's gonna be random1. Class will be rounded circle. me-2. We're gonna have some inline style with 38 pixel. Also the height. Object fit cover. Underneath this, we're gonna have our span tag, and we're gonna say position absolute. Bottom -0. Translate middle. Border. Also border light. Rounded -circle. bg-success. And then p-1. We're also gonna have an inline style of left 75%. Inside our span, we're gonna have another span with a class of visually hidden. Alright, and outside this div, we're gonna have a paragraph tag, M0, that's say mic. Alright, give us a quick save. Let's check out our desktop. Here's our first friend. Now let's work on the pop over. So once again, let's navigate to Bootstrap, search for pop over. Let's scroll down. Let's get the last one right here. Copy this back into VS Code. We're going to put it inside this div. So let's paste it in our clipboard right here first. We're going to take all of the attributes right here, cut that, remove the button, and then put it here. First, we want to set the data-bs-html to be true. We're going to put our custom template. After this, we're also going to define a trigger. So currently by default, it has a click trigger. So the pop over only show when we click it, and we can change that. So let's say data-bs-trigger. And then we want to say hover. All right, the next thing we want to do is add in our template. So right here, let's drop down to another line. We're going to remove this. And I already have the template copied in my clipboard, so I'm going to paste it here. And it's pretty straightforward. All we're going to use is the Bootstrap classes. So in your own time, just take a few minutes and go over it. Let's fix this spacing. Now there's one more thing that we need to do. Inside here, we cannot do an inline style. So we have to target it with our CSS. So in this image, I gave it a class of pop avatar. So let's navigate to our main CSS. And let's say pop over avatar here. And we're going to say pop hyphen avatar. We're going to set the width to be 48 pixel. Also the height, 48 pixel. Object fit cover. The border radius will be 50%. It's going to be a circle. And then a margin right of 15 pixel. All right, give this a quick save. Now let's check out our desktop. And here's our pop over. All right, cool. The next thing we want to do is when the user click on their friend, it should trigger the single chat right here. All right, let's make that happen. So back into VS Code, back into feed. All we have to do is locate our li tag right here and add in the data-bs-toggle. We're going to say module and target the module. So data-bs-target, and we gave it an ID of single chat 1. Give it a quick save. Now to our desktop. So when we click on mic, our chat window should pop up like that. So let's duplicate a few friends to fill up this whole space right here. All right, so back into VS Code. So this is our first friend, and I'm gonna copy this about 15 times. All right, now let's check our desktop. And here's our friend list. All right, the next thing we want to do is work on the chat icon right here. So back in the live link, there is this chat icon. And when we click on this, it will open our new message module. All right, so let's work on that. Back into VS Code. Let's collapse our chat bar because we are done with that. And also let's collapse this. And then this. Also this. Let's copy this comment tag. And then let's paste it here. This is gonna be our chat icon. Let's have a div with a class of fixed bottom. We want this to be fixed on the bottom. And let's say right 100. We want to push this icon all the way to the right. And a padding of 3 all around. Next, let's have some inline style. We're gonna set the z-index to be 6. And we're gonna say left will be initial. The type will be a button. And inside this, we want our icon. So let's say FAS, FA-edit. we want a background of white, rounded hyphen circle, P-3, and then shadow. So when the user click on this icon, we want to trigger the new chat window. So let's say data-bs-toggle. Let's say module, and then also the target. So data bs-target, and it has an ID of new chat. Give us a quick save. Now when we click on our icon, it will trigger the new chat window. All right, now we have one more section, and that is our main timeline. So let's check that really quick in our live link. So here is our main timelines. We have the story section, our create post. When we click here, we will have our create module. We also have our create room section, and this will be a slider. And then finally, our individual posts. If it's our own post, we can edit the post and delete the post. And here is the comment sections. We can either click here or here. And then we can also edit our own comments. All right, let's take care of this. So back into VS Code. So let's scroll up to our timeline. The first thing we want to do is define our div with a class of dflex. And the flex direction will be column. And then justify content center. We want a width of 100%. And then mx-auto. Now let's have some inline style. Let's say padding top will be 56 pixel. And we want to define a max width of 680 pixel. All right, inside our div, we're gonna have our story sections, followed by a create post section, and then create room, and finally our individual posts. All right, let's work on the story section. The first thing is we want a div with a class of dflex, justify content between. The position will be relative, and then empty-5. So inside our div, we're gonna have our 6 cars. So these right here, there are a total of 6. And the first one is a little bit different, but the rest should be the same. All right, so back into VS Code. Let's work on our first card. So story 1. So this one is gonna be our main avatar. So first, let's define a div with a class of mx-1. We want to set the background to be white and then rounded. The type will be a button and then some inline style. Let's set the width to be 6M. Our height will be 190 pixel. Inside this, we want an image. So let's say image. Once again, we're going to use Unsplash. We want to use the collection of happy people because this is our avatar. Let's say story post for the alt. And then we want to use a class of car-img top to keep it responsive. Next, let's define some inline style. Let's set the min height to be 125 pixel. And then finally, object fit cover. Now next we want to work on the bottom portion. So here's our image. The bottom portion is right here, the create story and this blue icon. All right, back in VS Code. Let's define a div with a class of dflex, align item center, justify content center, and the position will be relative. Next, let's define some inline style. We want to set the min height to be 65 pixel. All right, so inside this div, first let's create our text. It's gonna say create story. Let's set the class to mb-0. Text will be center, fs-7, and then the font weight will be bold. Underneath this, we want our icon. So let's have a div with a position of absolute. We want to set the top to be 0 and to the right 50%. And then finally say translate middle. Inside this, we want our icon. So let's say FAS, FA hyphen plus hyphen circle. Let's set the font size to be FS3. Text will be primary because we want to use the blue. Our background will be white. A padding of 1 all around. And then finally rounded circle. Alright, give this a quick save. We need to fix this class right here. It should be card. And I believe we misspelled something. So let's scroll down. Right here, it should be translate. Alright, looking much better. And here is our first card. Next, let's set a hover effect for this. So let's create a custom class right here. And let's say story. Give this a quick save. Now in our main CSS, let's say story and select the hover state. We want to set the opacity to be 0.8. Give this a quick save. So now when we hover over this, there's a slight change. Alright, now let's work on the rest of the card. So let's collapse this. And the rest of the card should be more easier. And the rest of the cards should be less complex. So let's say S2. This will be our second story. Let's define a div with a class of rounded. MX-1 and use our custom class of story. Inside that, the type will be a button. And then some inline style. Let's set the width to be 6M. Also our height will be 190 pixel. Inside this div, we're gonna set up our image. So let's use Unsplash and we're gonna use random 1. We're gonna have a class of card-img-top and also rounded. Let's define some inline style. We're gonna set the min height to also be 190 pixel and then object fit cover. Give this a quick save. And here's our second card. So let's duplicate this 4 more times. So 3, we're going to use random 3, and then 4, random 4. Give this a quick save. And here's our mobile view. This is our desktop view right here. Now let's navigate back to VS Code. And in mobile view, we only want to show 4 cards instead of 6 because everything looks squished up right here. So let's target story 5 right here. And we're going to say D none. So high on mobile, but then D-LG. We're going to say block. Let's copy this and paste it here to our story 6. Give this a quick save. And it's looking much better. And there's one more thing we need to do is we need to have this button right here. So back into VS Code, let's collapse all of our stories. And here will be our next icon. We want a div with a position of absolute. And set the top to be 50% and then to the right 100%. Next, we want to say translate middle. We also don't want to display this on mobile, so D-none. And then D-LG-block. Alright, inside this, we want our icon. So let's say FAS, FA-arrow, -right, and then P-3, border, text muted, BG-white, and then rounded circle. Let's give this a quick save. Check out our desktop. And here's our icon. All right, let's work on the create post section. All right, let's collapse stories and navigate to create posts. Let's have a div with a class of BG-white, P-3, empty-3, rounded, border, and then shadow. Inside this, we'll have our avatar, our create module, and then our actions. So let's work on the avatar. First, let's have a div with a class of deflex. The type will be a button. Inside our div, let's have another div with a class of p-1. Inside that, we want our image. So once again, unsplash. We're going to use the collection of happy people because this will be our avatar. Let's say class rounded circle me-2. Let's define our inline style. Let's say the width will be 38 pixel. Height will also be 38. And then object fit will be cover. Next, we want our input. So let's say input and then form-control. Let's say rounded-pill. Border will be 0. And then BG gray. We want to set a placeholder and say what's on your mind, John. We also want to disable this because there's going to be a create module and we don't want the user to type in the input. All right, let's give this a quick save. And here it is. Now let's work on the actions right here. I will scroll up. So let's have a div with deflex, flex column. So on mobile, the flex direction will be column. But then for the desktop screen, we want to say row and then empty-3. Inside this, we want our first action. So let's have a div with a class of deflex, align item center. Also justify content center. Let's say rounded and then drop down item. Inside this, we want our icon. Let's say FAS, FA-video, ME-2, and then text danger. We want a red icon. Underneath this, let's have a paragraph tag with M-0 and then text muted. And we're gonna say live video. Give this a quick save. And here's our first action. Let's create 3 more. We also want to say the type will be button. All right, much better. So let's duplicate this 2 more times. Here's our second actions. Let's change the icon and we want to say photo-video, and this will say photo/video. Here's our third actions. Let's change the icon right here. Let's say smile, and we're gonna set feeling/activity. Let's give this a quick save. Let's also change the color. So this should be success. And this should be warning. So this is gonna be yellow. Here's our 3 actions. Let's check out the desktop screen. And here they are. Now the next thing we want to do is work on the create module when the user click on this input. So back into VS Code, let's collapse our actions. And we want to focus on the create modules. So once again, we're going to use the Bootstrap module. Right here, let's copy this code back into VS Code. Let's paste it here. We're going to copy these attributes into our clipboard, remove the button. Let's target our input and let's paste it here. Let's fix this text right here. Command D, and we're going to say create module. So here is the head, the body, and then the footer. All right, let's work on our module. I'm gonna move the space. First, we want to remove the backdrop. So data BS backdrop, set that to false. And module dialog, let's say module dialog centered. Now let's work on the head. We're gonna say align item center. And then target the edge 5. Here, let's say create posts. We want to remove this class right here and say text gonna be dark and then text center. Set the width to be 100% and then remove our margin. Now let's work on the body. So let's remove these dots. So let's have a div with a class of my-1 and also p-1. And we're going to create another div with a class of dflex and also flex column. Inside this, we're gonna have our name, an emoji section, our options. Now let's work on our name. So let's take a look at the live link. This right here will be our name. This will be the emoji, and this will be the options. So our name will have this drop down of selection right here. All right, let's take care of that. So let's have a div of dflex and then align item center. Inside, let's have a div with a class of p-2. Inside that, we want our image tag. Let's use unsplash and the collection of happy people. Class will be rounded circle. And then some inline style. The width will be 38 pixel. Also the height. And then object fit cover. Next, we're gonna have our name. So let's have a div. Inside a p tag, we're gonna say John. And define the class of m-0. Also the font weight is gonna be bold. Next, we want our select. So let's say form-select. Border will be 0. BG gray. Width 75%. And fs-7. Remove the name and ID. And inside we want our options. So let's say option. First value, let's say public. Let's duplicate this, and this will say pin to top. So pin to top. Here we're gonna say hide. And then hide. That's our name. All right, there's actually gonna be one more section, is the text input. So let's work on that. Let's have a div. Inside we wanna say text area. We're gonna remove the name. And for row, let's set to 5. We also want the class of form-control and set the border to be 0. And that will do it for our text. Now let's work on the emoji. I will scroll up. So let's have a div of dflex, align item center, and then justify content between. Inside this, we'll have our image tag. Let's borrow the icon from Facebook. So I have the link right here and I'll just paste it in. We're gonna set the type will be button and an inline style, width of 30 pixel, also the height, and then object fit cover. After this, we want our icon. So FAR, FA-laugh, and then -wink. Set the font size to be 5, text muted, and also the type will be button. And that will take care of it for our emoji. Now let's work on our options. First, we want a div with dflex, and then justify content between. Next, let's say border, and then border 1, also border -light. We're gonna say rounded, p-3, and then mt-3. Inside this, we're gonna have our paragraph tag. Let's say add to your post. Let's have the class of m-0. Underneath this, we're gonna have our multiple icons, and there's gonna be 6 of them. So let's say I1 right here. So the first one will be I, FAS, FA-image. We're gonna use the font size of 5. The text color will be green, so success. and then MX1. Type will be button. All right, let's give this a quick save. So let's click this, and here's our create module. Here's our first icon, our header, our text area, our emoji. So I will scroll down, and there are 6 of these. So I'm just gonna duplicate this 5 more times, and then you can change its content later. There they are. Now we want to work on our submit button right here. So let's scroll here. I'm gonna collapse option. I'm also gonna collapse body. So right here. Now let's remove the first button. We're just gonna keep one button, and we're gonna say post. Let's add a class of W-100 for a full width button. Give this a quick save. And here's our create module. Here's our desktop view. All right, now let's work on the individual posts. So back into VS Code. Let's collapse everything here. Actually, we have one more section before that, and that's our create room section. All right, so the first thing we want is a div with deflex, and then justify content between. We're also gonna say position relative, bg-white, p-3, mt-3, rounded, border, and then shadow. So inside this div, we're gonna have our video button. So let's say button, and then we're gonna have our slider. And we're gonna split the slider into 2. So one will be for our mobile, and one will be for our desktop. After this, we're gonna have our slider buttons. All right, let's first work on our button. So let's have a div. Inside that, let's have our button tag with a class of btn, and then rounded-pill. We also want to say btn-info for like a bright blue color. Inside that, we want our icon. So fas, fa-video, and then me-3. Then outside of our icon, we want to say create room. Give this a quick save. And here's our create section. Now let's work on the slider. So let's navigate to Bootstrap and search for something called carousel right here. Let's scroll down, and this is the one that we want. So let's copy the code back into VS Code. We're gonna target our desktop first. So let's paste everything here. And currently there are a total of 3 slides. We only need 2, so let's remove this right here. This is our 3rd slide. And then also these slider buttons, which are these right here. We're gonna copy everything, cut it into our clipboard, and then actually paste it here under our slider button. Let's worry about that later and focus on our slider. And then we're gonna wrap our whole slider inside a div. So let's say div, and then paste it down here. Give us a quick save. Now let's work on the slide. So in here, we will want a total of 9 images in each slide. So let's work on our first one. Once again, we're gonna use unsplash, and we're gonna use random 1. We're gonna say class, rounded circle, also me-2. Next, some inline style. Width will be 38 pixel. Height will also be 38 pixel. Object fit cover. Let's give this a quick save. Here's our first avatar. Now let's duplicate this 8 more times. And we're just gonna change the number of random. So 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Let's duplicate 1 more. And this will be our 9th. Give this a quick save. And here's our first slide. Now let's check out the desktop. Here's our first slide. Let's turn off the auto slide. So back into Bootstrap. Let's scroll down. And these are our options. We can use the interval option and set that to false to turn it off. So back into VS Code. Let's scroll up. Right here, let's say data BS interval. And set that to false. We're also gonna say right here to be D none. And then D-XXL-block. We also want an inline style and set the max width to be 450 pixel. Now give this a quick save. Check out our desktop. And here's our slider. Now let's work on the second slide. So back into VS Code. We're just gonna copy all of these images and paste it here. Give this a quick save. Back into our desktop. And here's our slider. Now let's work on these buttons. Back into VS Code. Let's collapse these images. Now let's work on these slider buttons. We're actually going to remove all these span tag. And then change the button tag into a div. We're going to remove the default class. And we're going to say position will be absolute. Top will be 50. Start will be 0. We're going to say translate middle. D none. And then D-XXL block. Inside this div, we're going to create another div with deflex, align item center. Also justify content center, P-2, BG white, border, rounded circle, and also our story class. Inside this, we want our custom icon. So let's say FAS, FA-chevron, -left, and then text muted. Give this a quick save. Now check out our desktop. Here's our icon. Now let's work on the next icon. Back into VS Code. We can actually copy all of this right here. Collapse this. Remove this entire button. Paste in our div. We're gonna change this to say next. And then start is gonna be 100. Let's scroll down and change this to say right. Give this a quick save. Check out our desktop. And here's our next icon. And they're not a perfect circle. So let's fix that. So here, let's have some inline style. Let's set the width to be 30 pixel. Height will also be 30. Let's copy this style and paste it here on our previous button. Like this. Now let's check our desktop. And much better. And here's our create section on desktop. Let's work on the mobile version. So let's scroll up. Collapse this. Also the buttons. So it's pretty simple for mobile. First we want a div with a class of D-XXL-none. And then inside that we just want 4 images. So let's copy our slider. And let's copy 4 images right here. And then paste it here. Give it a quick save. And this complete our create room section. Now let's work on our individual posts. So up here, let's collapse this. And let's scroll up a little bit. All right, let's create our first post. So P1. Let's review the live link one more time. So here will be our post. We're gonna have the author, the post content, and then the post comment and like. All right, so back into VS Code. Let's have a div with BG white, P-4, rounded, shadow, and then empty-3. Inside this, we'll have our author, and then the post content. Let's work on the author. Let's have a div of deflex, and then justify content between. Inside this, we'll have our avatar, and then our edit, followed by our edit menu. All right, let's work on our avatar. Let's have a div of deflex. Inside, we want our image tag. So once again, unsplash. Let's use the collection of happy people. Class will be rounded circle. ME-2. Style, width 38 pixel. Height 38. Object fit cover. Underneath this, we want a div. P tag with M-0. And then FW bold. We're gonna say John. Underneath this, we're gonna have our span tag of text muted. FS-7. Inside, we're gonna give a date of July 17 at 1:23 p.m. Now let's have our edit icon. So let's say FAS, FA-ellipsis, -edge, type will be button, and this is gonna be a drop down. So let's say data BS toggle, and it's gonna be a drop down. Next, we're gonna say area expanded, and say false. And we also want to define an ID and say post one menu. Now let's work on the menu. So let's define our UL tag. We're gonna say drop down -menu, also border -0, and then shadow. We're also gonna define area label by. It's gonna be post one menu. Inside the UL, we're gonna have our LI, deflex, align item center. Inside that, our A tag, hashtag, define our class. Let's say drop down -item. Let's say deflex, align item center. Justify content around. And then FS-7. Inside this, we're gonna say edit posts. So let's duplicate this LI tag. And we're gonna say delete posts. Give this a quick save. And here's our author. And here's our edit dropdown. All right, now let's work on the post content. Let's collapse the author. And then concentrate on our post content. First, let's have a div of empty-3. Inside, we're gonna have the content itself. And then the likes and comments section. So let's first work on the content. Let's have a div and then a paragraph tag. Let's say lorem 25 characters. On the bottom, let's have our image tag. So unsplash. Let's use random 12. And we're going to use a class of img-fluid to keep our image responsive. All right, give us a quick save. And this should be random. And here's our post content. Now let's work on the likes and comments section. So I'll collapse this. Let's have a div with position relative. Also empty-3. And we're going to define our custom class of post__comment. So in here, we're going to have our likes. And then our comment start. So let's work on our comment. And this actually is going to be an accordion. So let's navigate to Bootstrap. And let's search for accordion. Right here. Let's grab this first one right here. Back into VS Code. And we'll paste it here. Let's scroll up. Here's our first item, second, and then third. So let's remove the second and third and keep the first item. Let's remove the spacing. And here's the end of the accordion. Let's expand this. So here will be our comment collapse. And here will be our comment expand. Alright, let's work on the collapse section. First thing first, let's remove the border. And then we're going to change this button into a div. Now let's add some classes. First we want to say collapsed, and then deflex, and then justify content end. After this, let's change the target name. So let's copy this and then Command D. Let's say post 1. And then inside here, let's remove this and have a p tag with m-0. And we're going to say 2 comments. Next, let's work on the comment expand. Let's remove the show class. And we're going to remove everything inside this div. So in here, we're going to have our first comment. Let's have 2 comments. And then we're going to have a section where we can create a comment. Alright, let's work on the comment 1. Let's have a div with deflex, align item center, and then my-1. And then inside that, we're going to have the avatar and the actual comment text. So let's work on the avatar. We're going to have the image tag. And it's going to be our main user. So once again, unsplash, collection, happy people. Rounded circle, me-2, style width 38, height 38, object fit cover. Now to the comment text. Let's have a div of p-3, rounded, width 100, and our custom class of comment __ input. And then inside this, we're going to have the text and also the menu icon to edit or delete a comment. So let's say menu right here. So let's work on the menu. Let's have a div of deflex and then justify content end. Inside we'll have an icon, so FAS, and then FA-ellipsis, -h. Let's say the type will be button, and this will be a drop down. So let's say data BS toggle, we're gonna say drop down, and then we're gonna say area expanded to false. Now let's create the drop down menu. So it's going to be the same as this one right here. So let's locate that. Let's scroll up. And it's going to be inside our author. And this right here, the edit UL. Let's copy it. Now let's collapse the author. Let's scroll down here and paste that in. Let's collapse that and give it a quick save. Here's our comment. And here's our menu. Alright, let's continue. So here, let's collapse our menu. So now we're going to work on the text. So let's say PFW-bold and then M-0. We're going to say John. Let's have another paragraph tag. M-0, FS-7, BG-gray, P-2, and then round it. Inside we're going to say lorem 8. Give this a quick save. And here's our comment. Alright, let's work on our second comment. It's going to be the exact same thing, but without the menu. So let's copy this and we'll paste it here. Here is the menu. So let's remove it. And let's say mic right here. We're going to change the avatar to be random 1. Give this a quick save. And here's our 2 comments. The one that is by the author, they can edit and delete the post. It should be comment instead of post. So let's change that really quick. So inside our menu, this should be comment. And here should also say comment. All right, let's collapse this. Now let's create our create comment section. So let's have a form of dflex and then my-1. Let's remove the action. And then inside our form, we want our avatar and then the input. So let's work on the avatar. Let's have a div and then our image tag. We're gonna use collection of happy people. Rounded circle, me-2, style width 38, height 38, object fit cover. Now to our input, let's say input form control, also border -0, rounded pill, and then BG gray. Next, let's have a placeholder and say write a comment. Give this a quick save. And here's our comment. Let's check out our desktop. Right here. All right, let's work on our likes right here. And also our likes and comment bar right here. So back into VS Code. Let's collapse this form. Also comment expanded. Let's close that. Let's close this. And we want to place our comment bar and likes right here. We want a div of dflex. Justify content around. This will be the like. And this will be the comment. Let's work on the like. Let's have a div of dflex. Align item center. Also justify content center. It's going to be a drop down item. Rounded. Text muted. P-1. The type will be a button. And inside this, we want our icon. So IFAS, FA-thumbs, -up, and then ME-3. Next, we want our paragraph tag. That's say like with a class of M-0. Now let's work on the comment. Let's have a div of dflex. So we're gonna have the same div like this. So let's copy this and paste it here. We're gonna change the icon to say comment-alt and change the like to say comment. After this div is gonna trigger our accordion. So let's scroll up here. Let's expand this. And we want to copy these attributes. And then paste it here. Give it a quick save. Let's check out our desktop. Here's our comment and likes bar. We can also click it here. All right, now let's put in our likes right here. So back into VS Code. Let's collapse this. And then also this. Let's collapse the whole comment start. And here's our likes. We want a div of dflex, align item center. The position will be absolute. We're gonna say top 0 and then start 0. Let's define some style. The height will be 50 pixel and the Z index will be 5. All right, inside our div, we're gonna have our icons. So let's have a div with me-2. Inside this, we'll have our first icon. So FAS, FA-thumbs-up. We're gonna say text primary. Let's duplicate this 2 times. And then let's change the icon to say GratiPay. And we wanna change the text color to red. So let's say text-danger. The next icon will be grin-squint. the text will be yellow. So let's say warning. Now under this div, we're gonna have a p tag with m-0, text muted, fs-7, and we're gonna say foo, tuan, and 3 others. Alright, give this a quick save. And here is our likes. There's some custom CSS that we need to do, so let's navigate to our main CSS file. So what we want to do is remove this default drop-down icon right here. So let's target our custom class. So first let's say comment. We have a custom class of post__comment. And we want to target the accordion button pseudo class of after. So let's say accordion button after. We're going to say margin left 0 important. And then display none, also important. Next, let's also target the hover state. So let's say hover right here. Let's remove these lines. We're going to set the background to be transparent. And then important. Also the border color to be transparent. And then important. Next, we're going to target the not collapse state. So let's copy this line and paste it here. We're going to say not parenthesis dot collapse. And we're going to keep the background to be transparent. And we're going to set the box shadow to be none. Alright, give this a quick save. And here's our likes and comment. We're missing our middle icon. So let's check our HTML. So right here, it should be FAB instead of FAS. Alright, and here's our 3 icons. Let's check out our desktop view. And here it is. Let's expand our comment. There it is. Alright, let's duplicate another post. So right here, let's copy everything. And we're going to paste it here. We're going to say post 2. We're going to change the author. So let's say random 1. We'll say Mike right here. And let's say May 24th. We can remove the menu because this is not our post, so we cannot edit it. So this is the menu. We can remove all of this. All right, give this a quick save. And here is our second post. Let's also change the image. So inside post content, let's say random 14. Let's scroll all the way up and collapse our timeline. Let's also give it a padding bottom of 5. Give it a quick save. And that's it. Here's our mobile view. And here's our desktop view. We have our login screen, our main screen, app bar, sidebar, timeline, and our chat bar. Alright, you should give yourself a pat on the back, and I'll see you in the outro. Congratulations on making it to the end. I hope that you gained something out of this, and I also hope that earned your thumbs up. With that being said, go out there and build something great, and I'll see you in the next tutorial.